So, should we just go ahead?
Yeah.
Right, heads or tails?
Alright, it should be part of the recording. Are we recording?
Yeah, all this time we're recording.
Perfect. So
Actually,
one of us will ask a question, but to see who asks first, we'll flip a coin.
Okay.
A very big, so you
Five
cannot see
franc.
what we're seeing, and I think it's worth describing. David, who is sitting in front of me, has a 5 franc coin, which I'm going to hold because for those of you who have not been in Switzerland, the 5 franc coin is actually very, very big, probably twice the size of a normal coin, and it has the guy of a hoodie. Okay, without further ado,
Okay,
let's
heads
see
or
who
tails?
starts. The numbers, the tails, I guess.
You tails, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Oh.
that's heads. So I asked the question. or
Yeah,
I
but I
st-
just realized we didn't define. I'll let you decide. Or it doesn't.
All right, I'll ask the question.
Okay.
By the way, should I call you Nacho or Ignacio?
Nacho is shorter.
Nacho is probably better, right? For our English listeners.
Yeah.
So Nacho, tell us a bit about how your process towards change started and maybe where you are now.
So I think looking back, sort of the way I was living, operating per se, when going about life, I think at a high level there were 2 phases. And I think one of them, I was basically living at a more intuitive level, even based on fear and just kind of very reactively. And then at some point, this moved to a more, I guess, deliberate way of living where I was more conscious of my actions and also the reasons for my reactions. And so yes, your question is kind of like when you go from one to the other. And I think probably I was around between 16 and 18. So I think the process somehow really started when it started I wasn't aware of it, but it really, so we were in high school together in Luxembourg, or middle school or however it is called. And then I was there from 8 to 16. So I guess really like the formative years, as they call them. And then, yes, when I was 16, so we were at the fourth year.
16 is fifth.
Fifth,
so,
yeah. Fourth,
fifth
fifth
out
grade.
of 7.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So around then, my mother found a new job in Switzerland, and so we moved. And this was really my big cataclysmic event. Because I think until then, and I think even we were super lucky, the group we were in. I think especially. Right?
Yeah, I was just going to say it was a very, very tight group. We all got along with each other very, very well. And yeah, it must have been very hard to suddenly just, especially at 16, right? just leave all of that behind suddenly. Right?
Yeah, I think I also realized at that point, like, I mean, I didn't even realize, but I was faced with the fact that I didn't know how to make friends. Like,
okay.
Because it was never a necessary skill. Like, you were in that school and we had all the people around us you grew up with, and you never really need to learn how to, you suddenly you're in a room with people you don't know, with things they like, with their own cultures. And
maybe just to clarify, because this is not
Sure.
always the case, right? People tend to do primary school and secondary school in separate places.
Yeah.
Whereas for us, it was all the same. So we were the same 25 people from 8 years old to basically 18, or even from 6 years old to 18. So definitely no need to make new friends. We were always in the same class with the same people.
And I think for like Diego and some of our other friends, I think maybe even kindergarten. So like really, their first memories are with each other. And I mean, for me, so I was in Germany first, and I was born there until I was 8. But I remember like when I first arrived to Luxembourg. Okay, it was a bit complicated because I was 1 year above, but I guess sort of a tangent maybe for another time. But I quickly went down a year and I joined you guys. But I remember the first moment I go into this class, I think it was Ramon. Like, he just turns to me and he's like, "Oh, do you want to be my friend?" I think it's my first memory from those times, and it's so cute. And I think it explains in a word, I don't know, phrase so well, I guess, the atmosphere there. It was just, we hit it off so fast. Like, there was no growing to like each other. We just liked each other. And it was amazing. And yeah, so going from there to Switzerland was hard. And I think what made it especially hard is I joined the Swiss public school. And of course I knew some French that we learned in Luxembourg. But since it was not so good, they first put you through this special program. so that you may integrate. I think it was even called like integration system, and this was especially for like people who came from abroad. But as it turned out, it was mostly people who are 19 or 20 who had already finished high schools, but their diplomas were not valid in Switzerland. So they sort of wanted to do the last 2 years again, validate their diplomas. And so I think that probably made it extra hard because not only is it a new place, but we're also like at different stages in life. And so I think that was the first moment I was confronted with the reality that however I was living, however I was thinking, it was not working for me. I mean, I didn't realize why, but I could feel sadness. I could feel, not sure, depression. Maybe it's too the word is too big, but I could feel like not deeply not satisfied with how life was going.
And maybe what's interesting here, and maybe this is also a topic for another episode, right? Is that most of these changes come with a shock, right? I think we will also see in my story that it was kind of also something that happened to me that made me realize or that forced me to behave differently.
Yeah.
And so at least the start, it's not a conscious decision, right?
Yeah. And I would love, I mean, kind of going ahead, getting ahead of yourselves, but I mean, I guess we can see also where for you it's going. It's like, it starts with hardship. And I would love to hear, because I think it's sort of not a big topic, but this idea that to grow, you have to go through pain and there's this whole process.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to hear of stories where they went through a fun and happy process reaching there. And it must exist, but it seems to be very rare based on what you usually hear. But yeah, so I guess going back, so maybe we can fast forward a bit. And so during that time when I arrived in Switzerland, a lot happened also. I was there for 6 months to a year, then I tried another school, and at the end, my mother found a job at the international school in Les Ans. So this was about 2 hours away. So where we first went in Switzerland was in Geneva. And then, yes, I think at the time she was getting a lot of pressure from me. That I was like, oh, I don't want to... I think I associated French with leaving Luxembourg, so I just deeply hated it. And I think to this day I do also despise it for that reason. And I mean, it's not a bad language, but I think now it's more like of a funny thing to do because of the association. But basically I put pressure. I was like, I mean, putting pressure, just being spoiled and like, no, I want to study in English, whatever. And so eventually she finds this international school. And so I guess 2 years then had roughly passed since I left Luxembourg. And then so I must have been around 18 now. And so there it was the first time I was living alone, since it was also like a boarding school. And so she allowed us to stay there. And I think it's here that I met Darhan. Mm-hmm. So Darhan he became then one of my closest friends, and like after Luxembourg. And as flatmates, we had a lot of conversations about, we would call it the void, because I think it was this feeling of, I think it was a word that represented well, like these sensations you would get. Like somehow, I think this pain you get is essentially, I guess, your way of living, your ideas, your values that you have at that point are at odds with the reality. And this causes some sort of pain. And so we described it as a void. And just to answer your question, then I guess around 18 is when I really started reflecting a lot, discussing a lot with someone else about what this might be.
So Darhan was in a similar situation to you in the sense that also he was coming from somewhere else, and for him also this was a kind of shock to his system, or what was his situation?
So his was a bit different. So I think he came more, what's the word? So he came from he got a scholarship to come here.
Okay.
So it was more voluntary per se.
Yeah.
He wanted to, I think he also had ambitions to, eventually study in the US, which he eventually did. But so I think this was one of his main drivers. I also realize now that it would be great to sit down with him and ask him also these questions. Because I think it's a long time ago now, so I forget, but like some of the details. But I think it was still hard for him because regardless, right? Even if it's because you want to do it, you're still at a new place, you still have to... And I think we were also both kind of like this nerdy type, and so it was a bit harder to fit in. Especially, this was a private school with very rich people, so it was a bit of a special place.
And so where did you see the first changes or the first voluntary changes?
So I think it really, it's hard to see like concretely the actions because it feels more like it was a long period of reflection, reading, and this slow process of. I'm sure I could pinpoint like a situation where I was like very conscious about what I was doing, but it was really. I just, in terms of memory, remember it being dominated by thinking a lot, reading all these books like The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Yeah. I think a lot of these people like the self-help movement say very similar things about.
How did you find these books? Because I remember when you left us, we were all at the stage where these books we didn't even know they existed, right? Okay, yeah. So when did that start?
So from a very young age, my father was pushing very hard for me about like these self-help books, philosophy, or however you may want to call it. Because I think basically he had a quite difficult life because I think both his parents come from a different period. So he's half Chinese, first generation Indonesian, and his mother is German, and he grew up in Indonesia. And his father was very absent. And not only that, but he really comes from like the boomer generation in Indonesia. So of course, it's at that time it was at a very different place. And so he really had to figure everything out. And I think as a consequence, he did suffer. Also coming to Europe, I think he had it was a bit complicated relationship with my mother. And so he eventually left. So he for sure had a lot of feelings of guilt. And I think actually for him, like, since we're talking about this change, from what he said is essentially after he left Europe, and so in some sense left us, he went through a very hard period of, I guess, regret, etc. And it's at this time that he started, reading and learning about these topics. And I remember since I was young, like he would just like read these things, do these things, but I was never really paying attention, being the young person who I was. But then I started to remember the books and things he talked about and reading those. Although I'm not sure if it's he who recommended. I think he did recommend Power of Now, but I forget where eventually I got. Maybe on Reddit or something. I forget what the question was.
So the question was, and I think you answered quite well, was when did you start reading these books, right? Because when you left, you weren't reading this for sure, right? Neither was I. But,
yes, and also around this period that I started reading, like, what's it called? How to Make Friends and Influence People. So these classic books. I think it's also. So, I didn't know what I wanted to study, but we had this teacher who was. The subject was business. Mm-hmm. And he was very well spoken and really charismatic also. And so I was like, I want to do business. And I mean, also had such bad grades, I couldn't really choose. But it's always nice to justify it. And so, yes, I remember I must have started reading in Reddit or wherever I was these days about, how can I become a business person? And of course, if you Google that, on the top of the list is how to make friends and influence people.
Yeah. Your father also was always a businessman, right? So that might have been an influence as well, or not at all?
I mean, for sure, I think at the unconscious level, right?
Okay.
But I never in my life felt a lot of pressure externally for if I should study A or B. Mm-hmm. Like, I think, and that's maybe in large part thanks to my mother, I think she was very... how do they say it? Laissez-faire, like
open,
as long as you don't fail. That was like, I think the bar was low, so it was just and I'm quite grateful for that. I think for my father it was quite the opposite. Like I think he has a lot of like musical talent based on like having seen him play and the way he talks about those things. But his father was really just the epitome or whatever the word is or like he was impersonating business, like just that's all he does.
Okay.
And he felt a lot of pressure to follow those footsteps. and he still does to this day, and I still think it's wrong, but so
good. So do you want to intercalate the stories? So
or put them together?
Yeah. So maybe we get to up to you. So this is 18 right. for you, right?
Right.
Maybe I can also start my story, and then we
yeah,
play
that
it
sounds
back.
Perfect.
Yeah. So maybe it makes sense to pick up a bit where you left, but honestly, for me, the change didn't come until much later. So until when I was 23. So 16, you leave the European school. I was for me there was no other option than going to university. I didn't even consider, right? All of my friends or everyone around us would just do that. There was no thinking about a job afterwards. It was simply the process, right? Now you're at school and you have to get good grades. Then you will be at university. You have to get good grades, and then you will get a job, and that's it. That's life, right?
Out of curiosity.
Yeah.
So after I left, I guess there were 3 more years, or how did things change a lot? I'm curious because I remember when I left, I think it was also the year that a lot of people were skipping the year. I think the class must have quite changed as well.
Yeah, the class definitely changed. A lot of people were had to take the year again, and a lot of those were our friends. So
I actually, fun fact, like I was gonna go down as well, but because I left, they were like, it doesn't matter, just let him pass. But anyway.
It was also quite an important year because those 2 last years are the ones that prepare you for the last exam, and then you go to university. So typically that's the moment where if you're kind of falling behind, they will force you to take the year again. And so I think 4 or 5 in our class, and most of them were our friends, had that happen to them. And so for me it was just finishing school. I would still see them basically all the time, but now less in class and more after class. And then I chose my degree a bit randomly. In the last year of high school, I was interested in biology, and so I chose biomedical sciences. Here my parents were very open as well, which I think was not a good thing in this case. I could have I think they had more experience, and they could have helped me or guide me to something else. In the end, I don't regret it.
So looking back, what do you wish they would have said, or in which direction should they have guided you?
So I think the best way to answer the question is how I did it with my sister.
Okay.
So when I had to advise my sister is 7 years younger than me. So when she was 17 and she was choosing, I was already 24. I had some experience. And she was hesitating between doing computer science, math, and or art.
Yeah.
She was very good at drawing. And what I told her was, listen, Sarah, and this is based on my knowledge of her, right? This is not general advice, but this is the advice I think a parent or a brother can give because they know you, or a sister, of course.
Yeah.
Which was, hey, Sarah, you are like me. You like many things in life, but you don't like anything to an extreme level. Right? So you can be happy with mostly anything. And so maybe for you, it's more important to look at the rest of the quality of life that a certain type of study will give you, right? I don't think you will be much more happy doing art and computer science, for example, because you really like both, but you don't love art and you don't love computer science.
Right.
However, computer science is going to make everything in life much easier for you. And potentially, you also like video games. As a master's degree, you can always go, for example, into video game design, right? Where you can incorporate the art component back into your studies. And so she ended up choosing computer science and mathematics, and she's very happy that she did that. She still does art as a hobby, but then now she has a very easy life because she can get a job very easily, well-paying job, and she can do everything she likes outside her work. Right? So,
because I'm curious, to go back. So for you basically said it was not. So your sister had these 3 questions, right? There was computer science, math, and art. If you had to give 3 at the time, what would have those been?
For myself?
Yep.
Yeah. So probably something around physics, mathematics, or engineering. And if I was my parents, maybe they didn't know this, but I was very disappointed in the end by how science works. And so maybe it was my parents didn't do science. I think they did computer science, both of them, and so they couldn't have known. But still.
But you said there are 3 options for now: math, physics, and engineering.
Yeah.
But you studied biology.
Yeah. So
I'm just curious.
3 more options,
like,
right?
It was more like, oh no, what would have been the 3 options at the time? So one of them would be biology.
Yeah, probably engineering. I had always wanted to do engineering, right? But my parents never asked me, hey, David, how come now you want to do biology? Right? Like there was no...
So
there's a conversation to be had, right?
So it was not so much about the choice, but like forcing you to have that inner or dialogue.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's helping the other person that has a lot less experience than you work it out. And also you have more worthy experience. I didn't know what a job was, right? At 18, you just don't know what it means, right? So
that's true.
Yeah. So basically I went to university, my grades started getting lower. I mean, I was going through life floating a bit.
Because I remember you were always the good student. But no, you were the good student, but you also knew how to have fun. So you were not the stereotypical good student in that sense.
So I wouldn't say I was the good student. I would get good grades.
You're the clever student.
But that only gets you so far, right? Maybe there's some really clever people that can also get through university without studying. But until I was 18, I basically developed no study habits. And so I got hit really hard at university.
You know, that's so interesting because at the time I always remember, because of course I didn't know what happened, and like we would see each other. But when I would come back, there was always a big group, so we weren't sitting down and having these deep conversations.
Yeah,
it was just like having fun. And because I remember at the time thinking like always looking up and being like, "Oh, David, he knows how to study so well," but
definitely not.
But I mean, you did make it work really well at the end.
So I think my whole point was that I was curious. I liked classes enough that I could just listen. Right? If you're not listening in class, then you have to study. If you're listening in class, I'm sure that, because you were not, right? I'm sure that if you had listened a bit more in class, you probably could have gotten away with a lot more.
Oh yeah, I mean actually I do remember, but I'm not sure how real those memories are, but like, so which year do we start together? And like, not the year, but like year of school. It was the second year of primary?
Something like that. That I cannot
I remember sitting, and then of course, since I doubled the year, I already knew more. Well, in quotes. And then I remember teacher asking questions, and I would look at you, and I would realize you also know more. This is like one of my really early memories. And then I think I was doing the same thing as you, but I was doing it much worse because I wasn't even listening. So very, very, very quickly, it was not sustainable. I think it's a miracle I passed. But I forget where I was going. What were we talking about before?
Studying, right?
Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry. I think I interrupted you because you were okay. So you were talking about starting university and then grades.
My grades just collapsed.
Okay. Right? So it's because it was harder than in high school, you would say, or
because
I just used to were even less.
It's two things, right? Okay. I stopped going to class.
Okay.
I was just playing video games all day long.
Okay.
This was what I would do.
Right.
And so at least in high school, I was forced to go to class. Right? But in this case, I even stopped going to class, and obviously it was harder as well.
Yeah.
I was extremely lucky again. I've been very lucky in life, I feel. But in the my first day at university, I met a really cool guy, Alex.
Mm-hmm. He
actually studied, and so he helped me a lot. Right? He would come to my place 1 week before the exam, saying, "Okay, David, this is what we need to study for the next week. Yeah. Let's sit down and study." And so thanks to him, actually, I passed.
That's awesome,
yeah. I passed with really bad grades, but I still passed.
What a bro. Shout out to Alex.
So developed no habits. I just floated through life. I just did exactly what I wanted at each point in time, which was mostly playing video games, going out, partying, and that's basically it.
Okay.
I had 1 year when I finished my bachelor. I wanted to go to Belgium to study.
So it took 3 years to finish the bachelor?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I went to Belgium and I wanted to start engineering.
Okay.
So I always felt, okay, I actually maybe I could have studied engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to Brussels. But in Brussels, there were quite a few friends, among them Axel and Bruno.
Yes.
And those 6 months, I was in Brussels 6 months. I just partied. Like I stopped going to university very, very, very soon. But this was another type of degree. This was maths, this was physics, and I failed everything but like really 0.5 out of 20 in the exams, right? Like literally maybe they gave me points for writing in my name, but that's all I got right in the exam.
So in the beginning of that 6 months period, like I guess you were going to classes, like you must have been motivated, right?
Yeah, so what happened was during summer I took like a catch-up course in math
to transition
okay. Right? All of this, my father helped me a lot here, right? He was recommending things, right? And like, for example, in this case, he was a lot more involved. And so I felt things went a lot better.
But because you were asking for it, or I'm curious?
I was completely lost, I think.
Okay, he realized, like, okay.
So, so he signed me up for this course. I went to this course, and then the first week, I had already seen everything that the teacher was explaining, so I was like, okay, I don't need this. I will come back in 2-3 weeks. And then I started partying really hard. I came back 2-3 weeks later, and I couldn't understand anything.
There's this. I'm not sure if it's a meme. I think it is a meme that I really like. It's 2 side panels, and there's like a big board, and the teacher is writing formulas, and it's very basic, like just rules of arithmetic. And then you're on your phone 3 minutes. You look back up and there's like these crazy integrals and formulas that you've never seen.
This was pretty much what happened to me. And I was having so much fun. We were going to the bars all the time. And
so this was also with Axel and Bruno?
Yeah, Axel's place was between my place and university.
Oh no.
So it always felt like, okay, I'm going to university, but I got derailed into the wrong place. And of course, no fault of Axel or Bruno, right? I was the one making all my choices. But because I felt like this, my father immediately realized, okay, this is stupid. You're coming back to Luxembourg and you're getting a job. Yeah. And so I got an internship at the lab in the university. Then I worked at a pizzeria during summer.
I remember at Vapiano, you're working with Pablo.
Yes, that was a very good experience. And then I started my master's degree. Okay. My father said, hey, in the University of Luxembourg, there's a bioinformatics degree. I think you should do it. Again, I was completely lost.
So it was just you're doing it?
Okay, I just did it. Yeah, okay. Exactly.
Were you worried about that that whatever happened in Brussels would happen again?
Not really.
Why not?
I didn't think about anything.
Okay, it was just like...
I was just going through life.
Okay.
Right?
You were just like, okay, okay.
Yeah. Obviously, at the moment, it felt really bad. Like, this was my first real failure, but I learned nothing from it. Or actually, my master's actually went much better.
So which part is the real failure?
Going to Belgium.
Oh, because in your head it was like, okay, I'll try engineering.
Okay. And this was like, maybe I'm a bit smart, but it's completely, it's simply not enough, right?
No. For sure.
So also putting me in front of the fact that I had developed no works or study habits at all at this point. Actually, now that I think of going to the master's went a lot better. The master's was structured in a weird way in which you would have an intensive course of 2 weeks, just one subject. You would pass an exam on that subject, and then you would move on to the next subject. So instead of doing 5 things at the same time and getting 5 exams in December,
that's awesome.
You would just do one, pass the exam, and then go on to the next one.
I love that so much.
Yeah. So that system worked quite well for me. And then in January of that year, I met my now girlfriend. Mm-hmm. I was with another person at that time. And then basically 2 months later, for some time already didn't work with my ex. And then basically with Alicia, it clicked immediately. And basically in March of that year, we were already dating. Mm-hmm. I went to the US afterwards. She went back to Spain.
Oh, this is when you went to Buffalo?
Yeah, exactly.
Was it for an internship or
no?
The
it
thesis?
Was my master, my second year. So it was like an Erasmus, but for the masters.
That's awesome.
An exchange. Yeah, it was quite nice. I was working at Roswell Park, a cancer center. I also stopped smoking at that time. So nice. Quite a few good things happened to me at that point. And then I came back to Luxembourg.
So how old are you at this point?
I'm 23.
23, okay.
Right? And so I start living I start living with my girlfriend, right? Okay. And maybe just to clarify, because I think we've talked about video games, but I don't think I've emphasized how addicted I was to video games. And when we were 16, this was probably what destroyed your any study habits you had, right? At 16.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I really think it's very hard because in some way, my fondest experience is Luxembourg, but I'm so happy to have left. That I was forced out because I would have never ever left voluntarily. But leaving, I was like, I kept playing while I was gone, but when I was in Switzerland. But eventually, like, it was boring to play alone, or there was no other friends who were really into something like in such a way, and I think it made it easier to try other things. And yeah, so I understand your sentiment, and I know for sure. Like, I remember, even in Switzerland, after playing, like, I remember the first years when I was at Geneva. So this is right after leaving Luxembourg. My life, like, after I would leave school, my life was really just two things. It was like anime and video games. And basically, whenever I would take the bus from school to go home, I would listen to the anime music, and I would always think the same thing. I'd be like, "Oh, this life is so shit. Why is it not like?" So in a weird way, I think, and it's something we do a lot, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but we use games and these great stories as a way to escape our own lives.
Yeah.
Which is great because sometimes you're just tired, and it's great to instantly be teleported to this magical space and with these fun characters that you can see. But it's also dangerous in the sense that it doesn't really allow you to. And I think this is maybe one of the ideas I'm most fond of is this idea of, becoming your own hero of your own story. Like, just this idea of exploring, like, what are you capable of, and just trying it out to its full extent and see what it gives.
Yeah. I think, I might say a few bad things about video games, but I have nothing against video games, right? Yeah. It's just that for me, specifically, right, the way that there's a very clear progression, there's a competitive aspect, and you have numbers that tell you that you have gotten better, so you can play against those numbers, and then those numbers go up. So it's a world where everything is easily measurable, and I respond a lot to that. I respond really well, or my brain really loves that component, and so I get addicted very quickly.
No, and I mean, I totally get it, because I think something we both probably like is just learning something and getting good at it. There's something really, like, I just look at you and I know, like, there's this pleasure of mastery, kind of.
Yeah.
And of course not for anything, but still. Like, I was watching, I think yesterday, and I sent you the link, it was Veritasium, where he basically talks about, I forget the title, like the title is something like, you need 10,000 hours to become a master, but you also need these 4 other things. And among them, one of the really important ones is this quick feedback.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're playing tennis, you can quickly see, did you make a mistake? And in a video game, it's kind of perfect, because since it's digital, it was coded. Of course, you can give any possible metric you would want. And actually, I remember, so when I was in the Lausanne American School, so this is this private school in Lausanne with Darhan, at the time we would play StarCraft.
Yep.
And he was like rewatching his replays, seeing what he did wrong, and really trying to analyze. And it's such a cool thing to be able to do. And so I think, it gives such a big dopamine rush to be like, oh, I can improve this.
Yeah, exactly. And some people respond more than others, right? Some people, we have some friends that don't play video games, right? For example, I think of Sebas doesn't play video games, right? But yeah, for some reason, you and I tend to respond to that quite a lot.
Interestingly, like, while I do respond to it, I was kind of a stupid kind of player. Like, now I'm very aware of it, and I like that of, looking at feedback. But at the time, I would not spend a lot of time, I could do this better. And I think it also kind of characterizes, like, I think maybe it goes back to what you were saying, like, we have some friends who are a certain way. And I think this kind of goes back to everyone has sort of a different essence, so different inclinations. And I think mine is very intuitive. And then I would not be too deliberate when I was playing. And so I was not such a good player, like in many games. Like I think in the beginning, maybe that's not even true, because I remember playing new games and I would be terrible. But it's tempting to say, like, because it's intuitive based, I would in the beginning maybe be okay, or better. But then as time progresses, I would lose that edge. But regardless, like I think I liked playing much more for maybe I was more a hoarder, like in World of Warcraft, acquiring items. But yeah, for example, in World of Warcraft, I remember it was just like leveling up and so it is related, but I can see now the difference. Like for me, it was more about like getting achievements and stuff. But another one, which is actually in a way more meaningful, is getting better, and you can do this through like this feedback. But I was buying more into the silly token gamification process.
I completely agree with you, and I was kind of the same player, right? I think it relates to studying as well, right? Like I didn't study the game, right? So I just got good because I got a lot of practice,
right?
But there's limits that you hit, right?
Exactly.
And so at some point you have to read on it, you have to review your own games, and that part I don't find so enjoyable, so I tend not to do it. But now that I've gotten older, that's what I try to do more, and that's what I value more. And I wish that at least I could have gotten that out of playing so many video games,
Yeah, man, I totally like.
But I didn't even get that, right? I didn't even get that that process of improvement. It was more like you a bit just playing and playing and playing, and you would incrementally get better.
Because I think in life it's really hard to, like, if you wanna, like, for example, when I was younger, I think I spoke very quickly. I would have been like, oh, I don't know. I was very anxious. And so, for example, I remember at times being like, oh, I want to speak more calmly, take my time. And it's hard to put I'm not sure it's putting the time, but I think it's kind of related to what you're saying now. It's like being more deliberate, being like, okay, things start to take their time. Like, I think there was always the want, but I was always too lazy, or I was not appreciating the joy that there is within improving like different skills. But maybe let's go back, because we keep
no, but it's good.
It is good. I like this. It's always fun to talk about the world of Warcraft.
So maybe why don't I set the situation that started the process for me, and then we go back to your story.
Right. But maybe just to link to where we were last. So you were talking about video games.
Yeah.
You're 23.
Yeah.
And the issues.
I just started living with my girlfriend.
Okay, so all right.
So we had like sort of the honeymoon phase, right? When we started dating, 6 months of absolute bliss. We spent all our time together. I didn't even play games at that time. I was always at her place. Then we each go our own way, and then we come back to Luxembourg together with our first jobs, basically. I started working in a startup, and she did a few internships in a few different places.
Right.
And that's when the couple life starts getting a bit complicated, right? Because I'm coming back home every day thinking about StarCraft and not thinking about spending time with her, right? And this is something, this becomes very obvious to the other person. Yeah. I was also extremely messy. I had never put the time to clean up after myself, so I wouldn't mind like a dish being out on the kitchen sink for days. And obviously she wasn't like that. She was like that before we met, but then in that year before we met, she had changed quite a bit in that sense. So that created a lot of friction. But for me, the sense was, hey, this is who I am. I'm a gamer and I'm messy. And this is just part of me, right? And this was my attitude to life. This is just who I am, right? But she said, basically, David, I don't want to live with this type of person. And she had every right to do so, right? And I could also keep doing what I was doing, but it would be without her, right? Yeah. So my first reaction was quite negative, as you can imagine. Yeah. But thankfully, I had the lucidity to put some thought into it and understand her point of view, which in this case was the correct one. And so I decided to scale down my gaming a lot. I tried this for maybe a few weeks, a couple of months, and it would always be the same. I was able to do 3, 4, 5 days, maybe a week, where I would only play 1 or 2 games a day. But it would very quickly go back to, I want to play all the time. Yeah. Right? And so At this point I had already managed to quit smoking, and I thought, okay, let's do the same with gaming.
Yeah.
So let's quit smoking. And it kind of worked. So suddenly I quit gaming completely.
So sorry, I kind of distracted. So you said you would try, it would work, and then you would recede again.
Yeah, exactly.
But what made the change that it would work after that?
So I was trying to do it moderately, and that just didn't work.
Oh, okay, yeah. So
right. So it would always be, okay, today I only play one game. That's fine. But then Saturday she would go away, and so I would spend all the time she was away gaming. But then the next day I couldn't go back to just one game.
Oh, I know.
So then I would want to do
like scratching. Yeah.
It's really like a drug.
Yeah,
it's really like a drug, or at least in my brain it is. So I just quit cold turkey, and that led to many different improvements across many different areas in my life. And luckily enough, I was also able to self-reflect on this and say, hey, the attitude you had before, which was I just try to maximize the pleasure at every second, doesn't work as well as thinking maybe 1 week ahead or 2 weeks ahead and thinking, hey, or 1 month ahead, 2 years ahead, and thinking, hey, what next Sunday, if I look back to this week, what would I have wanted to this week to be, right? Because in the end, we're just a collection of memories, right? And if you spend all your week gaming, basically that week doesn't even register in your brain. So it's just like a lost week, right?
Yeah.
And so if Sunday comes and you've done many different things, you've gone on walks with your girlfriend, on dates, you've seen your friends, all these different things, then you've created many new memories during that week. Yeah. And Sunday, every time you reflect and every time you think about what you're doing, it's much more fulfilling. And so that for me was the first change, right? Realizing that I can maximizing the pleasure at every second of my life is probably not the best way to go about things. Right. Floating through life is not good enough anymore. Right?
But so, I guess I have two questions. Like,
of course.
I'll say them just so we remember when we go deep into the rabbit holes of thought. So the first one is, you were saying many improvements. I'm just kind of curious which they were. And then the other one is in terms of all those realizations. Were you having discussions, or it was just like you sitting down, going for a walk and having these internal dialogues? Also, like maybe you were reading something which made things click. I was kind of curious to hear more in detail how that process worked out.
So at this point, I wasn't reading anything. I was an avid reader at 16. I was reading mostly fantasy, but at this point I had completely stopped. It was mostly with myself. It was very shocking to me. I was really convinced that people were who they were.
What do you mean people who were?
Like, this is just your personality. Each person has a personality.
Okay.
They have a way of being, and that's their way of being, and that's it. Right?
Oh.
And this also applied to me, right? There's no
like
direction
kind of set in
life.
Stone.
There's no direction because life is just as it is.
It's like realizing maybe you have like you're driving your Tesla in automatic mode and you're like, wait, I can actually steer it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good analogy.
But so were you like taking a shower and you were like, oh. So I'm just curious, was it like a moment you remember? Or was it a gradual process?
I remember telling my girlfriend. That's what I remember. And I think it was maybe after a week or two, I started going to the gym with her, right? I started doing many more things, and I wasn't missing gaming. Like for me, I thought I was sacrificing a lot to stay with my girlfriend. Yeah. And after a few weeks, I realized that there was no sacrifice. Right? There were only good things coming out of it. Right. And so I remember telling my girlfriend, hey, what the hell? Is this actually how things work? Same thing with the messiness, right? I'm still not perfect, but I have improved a lot.
So for those who cannot see, on the desk there's some dirty dishes and cups.
There was a party yesterday at my place where Ignacio was also present.
That's right.
I managed to clean most of everything, but not everything. There's a few dishes still out.
I think that's my wine cup actually.
that might have been.
Trying to pinpoint my blame on you.
Yeah. So I think that for me was the first. Wasn't a big shock, right? But it was kind of a big one in the sense that, hey, I'm losing my girlfriend, right? Which happened again, right, for my second shock.
Yes, we'll get there because it's also very interesting. But I see. So it kind of going back. Okay, you have. Actually, I have a friend like Sundar. I'm
Yeah.
not sure, maybe you've met, and we've had many discussions about relationships. And one, I'm not sure, analogy or like visual he likes is like a relationship is not a meat grinder, but it's kind of like grinds two things together.
Mm-hmm.
Because essentially you spend so much time with the other person that maybe your flaws are highlighted.
Yeah.
And it's a great source for growth because you're like, oh, these are things I didn't realize were like, if it's I think it's hard because if it's a problem for another person, it's one of two things. Either it really is something you should be working on, or as you said, it's just the way I am.
Yeah.
And I feel like looking back, my life is a lot of these swings between this is who I am, and I think it's hard to find that balance between those two. But so going back, so this is somehow what it started. This,
yeah.
So she put an ultimatum. She was like, "I love you, but this is just something I cannot live with." And then
yeah, I don't remember her exact words, but this was kind of the
feeling.
It
was the feeling,
and not in a bad way.
Yeah.
Simply, hey David, you're free to do this. It simply doesn't work for me.
Oh, she was very mature.
She was very mature at that point.
Awesome,
yeah, definitely more than me. Yeah. So she was a big help there for sure. So yeah, and then this actually had a big impact on her as well. So we started discussing this improvement between us, saying, hey, what else can we improve, right? We started discussing our relationship more as a partnership with that we want to make grow, right? Something like, okay, maybe a company is too dry or too unromantic.
No, I think
but you know, it's
companies can be romantic.
Yeah, something I detest now is after having I'm still with this girl, right? It's been 7 years.
Yeah.
She's called Alicia. I don't know if I've mentioned her name, just in case I mention it afterwards. Yeah, there's all these romantic ideas that relationships are just based on love, and if you love each other, then everything will work out. And this is complete bollocks, right? In the end, like love is useful to hide the flaws of the other person for a year.
Yeah.
And then after 1 year, either you start working on the relationship, or maybe a year is just like an arbitrary time measurement, right?
Yeah.
But after some time, you either start working on things because nobody's perfect, and so there's probably things both of you can work on.
Yeah.
Or these things just fester, and at some point they will just break up the relationship. And so this is why communication is going to be so important in a relationship, because being able to communicate to the other person,
right.
Hey, this needs improvement, and the other person must also be able to say, hey, I don't think this is actually in need of improvement, right? This is actually a good thing, or this is actually neutral, and it should be you who needs to learn to live with that, right? That's also, it doesn't mean that you're submitted to the other person in the sense that now everything the other person doesn't like, then it's all part of a conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because like talking about, it goes back to this grinder, like this two objects grinding against each other and slowly finding balance.
Yeah.
And like I think it's exactly that, like the opposing forces, like what we're saying is really, on the one hand,
maybe there's here we have a really nice painting in our room, Alicia and I, which is a bit more a more romantic way of putting what you're saying about the grinding stones. It's basically a man and a woman. Instead of heads, they have a flower, like what you would put in a vase, many flowers, and then each the man and the women are pouring water to make the flowers on the other person grow. So each other is making the other person grow, which is I think is something that we realized after a year and a half of relationship.
I think there is that, and then the missing part is like removing the weeds, like tearing them aggressively.
That's a very good point.
It's not only putting water.
It's not always pretty. It's not always pretty. Indeed, no, that's a very good point, Nacho.
But I think what I like about this is also just kind of highlights at least looking back, the issues I've had in relationships as going in either extreme. I think the one where you kind of so one side is like, this is the way I am.
Yeah.
And then the other one is like, oh, I might have room for improvement. If you let go of, oh, this is the way I am, you're kind of like simping.
Yeah.
This well-known idea of like, oh, you're right, babe. Oh, I'll do anything.
Yeah.
And it's super also not attractive, because suddenly as a woman, you're like, oh, I can have him for free. Like, because he will do, no matter what I do, it's right. since he will always be like, and so that's not going to work out. And then the other extreme is like, no, but this is the way I'm like.
Yeah, I will never change.
Yeah, I will never change. And it's like this alpha male. And it's like, no, but you're just being an asshole. Like, you are confident, but you're a confident asshole. Like, it doesn't change that fact. So it's, I think it's cool, like, as a meta thought is if you understand the core of something, and it goes back to this idea of a mental model, you know it's valuable when the extreme behavior highlights something breaking down.
Okay.
Like, right there, if validating your own emotions, which is basically is like, no, but I feel like this is the right way to behave, is a very good like tenet of a relationship. Because if you look at the extremes, it makes it break down. Yeah. Either through simping or this rude alpha male personality. So.
And it's always harder to stay in the middle. It's not.
It's very
not
hard.
a stable.
Yeah, it's not stable at all. Like this makes me think about Gandhi and his autobiography, and he calls it an experiment, which I love, which I never managed to finish. But if the book is too long, there's very high chance my attention span is too short. But he has this idea which I really like of him wanting to live a good life, which is essentially that, right? It's standing in balance, is like standing on top of a sword. Mm-hmm. And so like the moment you look right or left, you will fall over because it's such a thin line to be exactly in the balance. And it's this like, unless you're focused, you will either be like, no, it's fine that it's dirty, I was tired. And but if you are like very conscious about it, like, oh no, it's okay. But it's very hard to constantly, because there are many, I think, and this goes back to a higher level, is like relationship is one part, and there is work, and there are friends, family. And for each of these, there's a fine line to walk. Yeah. And you cannot simultaneously, like, they even say, right, for at any moment in time, you can only have 3 ideas in mind. So, of course, 5 being a bigger number than 3, like, you will inevitably, and that's fine. Like, I think
this I think, and I think this is worth a whole episode on its own, right? How do you manage to work on this ambiguity, right? This balance that you have to keep, where your emotions are constantly getting in the way, right? If I'm tired and my girlfriend says, "Hey, the dishes aren't cleaned," if I'm not tired, I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's true," and I just clean them, right? Because I left them out. But if I'm tired, maybe my brain, the first thing it does is come up with an excuse. Yeah, but you didn't clean them yesterday, right? It's like
but that's completely true. And I think because now this is a lot about like, oh, this is how we lived, advice, etc. Yeah. And I think the biggest issue is always context. Like, if during a week you are helping all the time, it's perfectly fine, you don't do anything. Yeah. But if you are already at the limit, like not helping too much, then it's not fine. And I think that's what maybe things to keep in mind also at the time is like, based on the current situation. And I think it kind of goes back about, talking about their relationship as a...
Just in that point, because there's 2 ways, even if that's true, right? For example, let's say that you've been doing a lot during the week, right? Yeah. We all tend to think that we all are fully conscious of what we've done, right? But we're much less aware of what other people have done. And this is where communication is key, right? Yeah, that's true. If the other person tells you, hey, the dishes are not done, and they do it in a nice way, and you say, honey, I've been doing this for the whole week, can you actually take care of these ones? Yeah. And then she reacts nicely as well and says, oh yeah, that's true, let me take care of this. Then that's fine. Or actually, I was also very busy during the week, do you mind doing it yourself? If you can have those conversations, then great, but emotions get in so quickly. But it makes it so hard to stay in that balance of and like you communication.
No, you're absolutely right. I think even what I was saying had a bit of a fallacy in the sense that, I mean, the context part is true. Yeah. But if you're having those calculations in your head, you're gonna miscalculate it. If you can perfectly compute every time, that's fine. No, I think you're absolutely right. You really. It makes me think also these ideas of like you should have not transactional relationships, like they're just genuine, like you want to help. And if you feel tired, it's fine, you just say it. Because if you start counting, it's true that you're unconsciously or actually even consciously like leading a more transactional relationship, which is just a shell of what it really could be.
Indeed.
Okay, so we have established sort of what led to and happened, or I guess, yeah.
So this was the first time that I had some conscious knowledge that I could do things differently.
Okay.
Right? So there was another second episode, but maybe why don't we go back to your story?
Okay.
Right? And then we can come back to mine later.
Do you have any question?
Yes. So you left us, I think, around 18, right? So
or 16 even. Yeah.
16. You were with Darhan in the last 2 years. You started reading some
so not
books.
Directly. I was 16, and then 18 I was in Geneva, basically.
Okay.
And then at 18
you joined the school.
So I knew Darhan maybe for 2-3 years before going to university. This was from 18 to 20. I forget. 20 or 21 I went to university. I went to 2011.
Okay.
Also I was 19. Right? Yeah, because I was born in 92. Yeah, 20.
Yeah,
I was 19.
Yeah, because I also started in 2011 and I was 18. So yeah.
Okay, so I was 19. Yeah, I'm 1 year older. Weird. Okay, so then maybe I was 7. Yeah. I think especially looking back, I have a lot of these numbers wrong. So maybe, I think I must have known from 1.5 to 2 years. So maybe I was 17.
Okay.
But yeah. So yeah, and then and I think ever since then, it was very. I think I remember now. Also, I was at the same time. I read a bunch of books which were very, eye-opening, let's say.
So you've talked about The Power of Now. What was in that book that has marked you?
If I've read the book more than 3 years ago, I forget everything. The one idea was, I think it was a lot about, again, I think it's easy to remember because they all say the same thing. I was reading something last night. But it's the idea of being present and being in the moment. And I think it ties into a lot of, if you dig deeper into so of course, the first part of everything is kind of this awareness change, realizing I can steer my own destiny. I think this is the big aha moment. And so I think when I was reading that one, I'm not sure, smart enough, wise enough, or I remember reading it and being oh yes, I should be more present in the moment, it's important. But at a very, when I read it, my understanding was very superficial. I think now if I were to reread it, everything, the same words would resonate at a deeper way.
Yeah.
Maybe to go, it's sort of tangential, but so around then, I think a book that had a bigger influence, I'm not sure why I mentioned this one, because I don't think it was very, it didn't steer me a lot. It was more the book of Benjamin Franklin. So he writes also an autobiography. And he just has a very cool life. What was it again? He was printing books, and then at some point he goes to England. But just reading the way he describes his actions, he was completely not engrossed, but a big part of him was optimizing for, being efficient, and also having a cool life in that sense. And I remember reading that and being that's so cool. He's thinking about all these things. And what not shocked me, but what impacted me the most was sort of reading how he was explaining his thought process, and seeing myself in him and being oh, I could totally do that. And then, of course, at that time, it's this great figure who had such an influence, and I think partially maybe it was not a very positive thing that was pushing me forward, because it was oh wow, he did such great things, I want to do them too. Ultimately it should be more oh, just, I think maybe now I'm going on another tangent, something I wonder, especially these days, if someone says, oh, I want to do great things, it's not such a good thing. Does that make sense?
Why is that?
I think maybe this idea of humbleness, you should be humble, you should. And
this is something I would disagree with, for example, but maybe we can come back to this humbleness, because I also read this, actually this book by Benjamin Franklin also marked me a lot, and I also felt that suddenly, I could do big things, but the reason was because it felt like a normal person.
Exactly. Yeah.
It felt like someone who had a bit of luck, then had also put in some effort, and then he had managed to slowly build himself into like this towering figure that had achieved so much, right?
Right. No, I think you're right, because it's not like you read it and as long as you can read and think, you'll be like, oh, because it's not like you read it and he's like, he makes this huge leap of logic, like, he said this thing, and because he said that thing, I knew he meant this, and like this 4D chess, you're right. I think it's very straight to the point. Like, it's just a simple example. Like when he was in London, he was like, "Oh, everything is so dirty.
Yeah.
Why don't we give a bit of money to some people who are unemployed to start cleaning stuff?" And it's just a very simple idea, and suddenly London starts being cleaner, right? And it's just like these ideas where you read and it's like, wow, it's so. But of course, when you hear a simple idea, which might even be a genius idea, it's always obvious in hindsight.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of not fooling, but the things are simple, but they're also actually, it takes a lot of wisdom to have come up with them. But at least you read them and they're like, oh, it's not too crazy.
Yeah. I remember something that had marked, I don't know why I remember this specifically, but I think at some point he's working with some laborers, I believe, and then he sees that they are drinking beer every morning or something like this.
All right.
And then they're getting drunk, but it also serves as calories, right? The beer also serves as energy, right? But he was like, okay, but bread comes from the same as beer. They come from wheat, I believe. And so why don't I just eat the bread, which gives me the same energy without being drunk, right? And they were telling him, no, I need the beer to have the energy to work every day or something like that. So maybe it's not something very big, but to me it proves someone is like, okay, he's able to make his own decisions. I mean, this is like hundreds of years ago, right? So the knowledge about now these things might seem obvious, but also the willingness to just reason a bit and say, hey, this seems wrong to me, maybe why don't I do it a different way, right? And that freedom of, okay, let me just do it my own way and draw my own conclusions was quite interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think ever since then it's very interesting. I think I was 18, and then I go to university. First I go to Japan for 3 years.
Yep.
And I was 2 years, sorry.
Why Japan?
Just mainly 2 reasons. So when I was at the international school, everybody was basically going abroad, so I was like, okay, I will also go abroad. And I could have done this international diploma, IB, so it's like a more fancy diploma, but then I had to study 6 more months, and at the time I was like, whatever, I just want to finish. So I mean, I guess in a way, that's the thing, right? I think around then I was conscious. I was becoming more conscious of like, okay, I can own my own actions, but still I was doing a lot of like these things where I did think about them, but maybe not as much as I could have. So I think that's what I was saying before. It's this long process, but I'll wrap back to it after. And so going back, why Japan? So at that time, everybody's leaving, and because I because I wanted to finish early, I finished with an American diploma, and I didn't have many choices because my grades were very average. I didn't take any advanced science courses. So my only option was, either to go to the US for a mediocre school. I really couldn't go to Europe because they don't recognize bad American diplomas.
Okay.
And then I remember at the high school, they had like a poster. It was like, oh, study business in Japan. So I wanted to study business also because of this reason. I couldn't really go to any science school. And to be honest, it wasn't even in my head then because I was always a bad student. So I never considered science, engineering. It was just like, I'm just going to do business. And I was also not a very artistic person. So I was literally out of process of elimination. There's nothing else I can do. Maybe if I was in the German system, I would have gone to a practical school or something, but it was not an option there. And so I see the poster. And I was like, oh, business in Japan. I was like, oh, because my father is in Indonesia. I was like, it's around there. So I think this was maybe 40-50% of the reason. And then the other one, I was dating this Japanese girl. I've probably started with that because for sure, in some sense, like it's the first time you fall in love. And I was like, we can. I think at the time I was telling myself it's mostly for the business, but I was probably listening 1 meter below my heart, but but yeah, I think so. Those were the two main reasons. I was like, I wouldn't have just gone for someone, but I was like, oh, I can still stay together, and this seems actually cool.
Yeah,
I go to Japan, super amazing experience. I stayed there for 2 years, and then throughout that time, I wanted to, because my father is Indonesian. I was like, let's work together, let's collaborate somehow, because that way I can get richer faster. Like, I think my whole idea at the time was like, I will just make a lot of money and help people. Like, it was literally the only thing I thought. Like, it was very simple and naive. I wasn't really thinking like, oh, what's a smart way to go about it? Like, what are my skills? It was just, oh, he's in Indonesia, why not? You know. And then at some point I realized, so living in Japan was fun, but as a very advanced country or whatever, it's very bureaucratic and it's very hard to make things happen, if that makes sense. Like, because we basically wanted to sell fish, and then I went a bit to like these trading places, and very formal, very slow, and I did speak some Japanese, but for sure not enough to give a good impression.
So wait, you wanted to sell fish?
Yeah, right. So
but this was so with your dad, or
exactly. My father had some connections, and he tells me, "Let's sell fish," and I was like, "Yeah, let's." People like fish, sure, why not? He was like, "Just find people who wanna buy fish. I will find fish." I was like, "Okay." Like really simple, like no. Because I think like if you're in a place like Indonesia, it's a bit more simple. You just like, I think especially the kind of job he had. So he was working for like a family business, which was like fertilizers, and he would just drive around, I guess, to find places where to dig stuff. And I think he was very used to just talking with people and making stuff happen, which is even easier there because there is like less of a bureaucratic infrastructure around many things.
Yeah.
And then after those 2 years, I was like, I loved living there, but I realized it was hard to do like this business with the fishes. And I also realized I would never want to work here because at the time I was either going to do the fishes or become a banker or something like that. Because that was like the best thing you could do.
Nothing in between.
yeah, nothing in between. Because that's like, if you're in business, that's maybe what you should do, right?
Yeah.
And then I realized in Japan their work culture is kind of toxic, and I was like, and also there's very few foreigners, so I was like, maybe it's not such a great place to start a career.
So did you finish the degree there? 2 years?
No, so it was a maybe 4 year degree.
Yeah.
4. I was like halfway, and then I transferred to a Chinese university.
Okay.
And then the idea was like, well, your grandfather knows some contacts in China, maybe you can make it happen there. And I was like, okay. And so I go to China.
This is amazing.
Yes, but it was hard. Like, I remember I hesitated a lot because I really loved my life in Japan. Like, in the first semester, I was mostly with like foreigners, with the exchange students. And then after that, I was like, no, I'm here. I should hang out with locals. And then in Japanese universities, they have kind of like fraternities in the US.
Mm-hmm.
Like associations and these kind of things, which I guess you have here as well. But I mentioned fraternities because they also get very hardcore, that you spend a lot of time with them. And then I signed up for the tennis team.
Yeah.
Which ended up being like the place to go if you want to like go to a drinking fraternity, which I didn't know. I just was like, I always wanted to try tennis. I think I had tried when I was young, but never again. And like we instantly clicked. Like they were super nice. Like I think 30% of them spoke good English, and so they were always helping me out, and we just played tennis. And so basically in Japan you have these things called izakaya, and it's like a bar / restaurant. Okay. And you have these big tables, and then you go there, and it was like all you can drink, and it's not too expensive, and they're really, when you go to like these team building events, they have these silly games. Basically, they took all those games, improved them, and so it's so fun. You just go there, and because you're doing so many games, language is not such a huge barrier.
Yeah.
And eventually, I did kind of get my way around a bit, and so it was hard to quit all that. But also, that only sort of lasts for 2 years, because after that you start looking for a job.
Yeah.
So I also realized kind of it was going to end. Plus, it's not sustainable to drink that much. So I go to China, and I really went with a lot of hesitation. Like I remember very distinctly, actually, it must have been winter. I was walking outside, and I think my father was pushing me because he was like, "Yeah, let's make money in China. Like you're not gonna do anything there." And then I was talking to him, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you should definitely go." And I remember, oh, I don't know, like I was so uncertain in my head because I wasn't thinking things deeply. So I think that's the irony, right? So I think at this time I was aware that, you know, I had agency over my own decisions, actions, but I was not a very good implementer of those. Because one thing is to be aware, and one thing is to do it, like kind of the distinction between knowledge and wisdom, right? So I think I had the knowledge, but I did not have the wisdom. Like I knew it's something I could do, but I wasn't actively doing it. The world was still pushing me around, per se, or like sort of. Yeah, I wasn't so actively involved. And at the end, I remember flipping. I was walking outside at night, talking to my father. I was like, "Oh, I don't know, flipping coins. Like, what the hell was I doing? You know, you sit down, you make a SWOT analysis or whatever. You know, you really like, you think it through. You're like, what do I want? But anyways, I don't want to say coincidence, but then I was like, yeah, okay. Looking back, it's true that in Japan I had exhausted a bit. Like I kind of got a decent conversational level, really enjoyed the culture, but moving forward, it was just I wasn't gaining new experiences unless I changed something. It's important to say. But at least the way I was living, nothing new was coming. And so I go to China. And it's funny actually because, you know, we were talking about change. So I think we're getting close to where I had the big change moment in terms of career. Because you can have it for many things, right? I think when I was 18, it was like happiness, like thinking about these kind of like, you know, the fact that perhaps you have perhaps you can have actions or like influence in your own happiness, right? But here it was just for career. Like, so maybe you can summarize it fast, but when I was in China, essentially what happens is I only spent there 6 months.
Yeah.
From the beginning, it was difficult. Like, I moved into a dorm.
You didn't speak any Chinese?
No. No, I was, from zero again. And Chinese is much harder than Japanese because the Japanese pronunciation as a Spanish person is very easy. Like the phonetics, you can pronounce everything. But in Chinese, you have the tones like ah. Maybe they all sounded the same, but it really is a language where if you say something slightly wrong, it might mean something completely different. Whereas Japanese, I never had those issues.
Okay.
But yeah, already from a language standpoint of view, it was hard. And then I get there, so I moved to Shanghai. And then in Shanghai, they have all these bridge highways, right?
Yeah.
And the dorm, my room, was like 2 meters from that highway.
Oh, God.
And it's super polluted. And it was I remember like coughing at night and feeling sick and talking to the new people I met. And I remember it was also hard just arriving there, feeling alone. I was like, oh my God, I have to do it all over again. All the things I had, quotes, built or found. I guess found, you don't really build them. And then talking with the new people, I was like, yeah, I was getting sick. And they were like, oh, it's normal. That happens when you just move to Shanghai. I was like, what?
Just immune system.
I was like, yeah, your body's...
So this is this is interesting because you've had so much change in your life, but then it makes it, for me, it highlights how important conscious change or conscious being in control matters in terms of how that change then impacts your way of being or your way of acting, right?
So it's crazy.
Because all of this was happening to you, right? But it's not like you were drawing conclusions that they're like genius. Okay, this means that.
No, I was really playing snake and ladders, like roughly. Things were just happening, and I think it's. I hadn't thought about this because I think before we even started recording, we were asking like, okay, you know, today we want to speak about at what point did you realize something had to change?
Yeah.
And now discussing this, I realized there are different moments. I think recently it was about relationships.
Yeah.
Now we're getting close to career. And I think the very first one, so what we are actually talking about, I don't know how to call it, but it's maybe in a very broad sense, you know, being more conscious about your thought process, right? So I think philosophy perhaps is a lot about this, like
meta.
Yeah, kind of, exactly. Yeah. So at the highest level. But then I think for different things, there's the same is true. I think probably if you're like a master of this meta thinking, then of course it will trickle down to relationships, careers. But just having learned that, you don't automatically gain that wisdom. You just are aware of it. And I think I was also not very, like, I was aware of it, but I guess I wasn't, smart enough to realize the ramifications of like sitting down and saying, what are all the things I'm doing that are important? Why am I doing this? Like, that would have been the smart thing to do, but like, I was thinking more like, holy shit, like what makes me happy, friends and stuff. But I was not thinking like career, like I was still, it's hard because like career and stuff, I was still going on default mode, but I was not aware of it. Even though I was aware, the mind is complicated.
Yeah, it feels like you can have the meta awareness, but then once you go down, you don't only need process.
Yeah.
Each one needs, like, for example, if you think about relationships, emotion control takes like you really need that to be able to achieve anything. If you think about careers, then the knowledge about how the professional world works becomes super important. It's not only process; it's actually how does this work, right? It's not obvious how the job market or a career in general works.
So it might also be related to this like premature optimization of like, I had a very shallow understanding of the world, and I was not sitting down and being like, okay, wait a second, I maybe don't understand things so well. Let me draw it out, like talk to people. I did try to talk to people, but it was never. And when I talked to them, it was not for this. It was still at this superficial, like, I wish we could, like, phrase it more concretely. But maybe let me continue with.
Yeah.
So, this is getting actually close to this big change moment of career. So, this happens, so I'm in China. And I did meet some fun people. Like, it was nice. But throughout that time, with my father, we were trying to set up this fishing business. So, we all traveled to Dalian, so this is in the northeast, quite close to Korea. I don't want to say middle of nowhere town because all the Chinese towns have like over millions of people, and probably this one too. So we go there, we go to a hotel and start discussing about doing business. And when I say we discussing, it's my grandfather and this guy because they're both speaking Chinese.
But your grandfather or your father?
My grandfather. So it was both my father and my grandfather.
Okay.
And my grandfather was a liaison between me and him because we have weird family dynamics. But so we were there, and I remember just being bored. I was like, what? I'm just like sitting here, like, what the, like I'm just not worthless, but I'm not really learning anything. Like, I would talk, like, so when I was in Shanghai, I started to realize, like, I would talk with my father, and he's an excellent communicator. So I would talk to him, and he would tell me, because I was like, what do I do? How do we make? He's like, you wake up, you check out like trading firms, you call them, and you just go and you make stuff happen. Like, he's an excellent, like, what's the word? Enthusiast or like motivator.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, let's do it. But I was like, not super into it because I was very shy. Even though I was meeting a lot of people, I still didn't have enough confidence in, I'm sure, ability to think, but like, I hadn't thought things through. So if I talk with someone, I would just be like, let's do business in Indonesia.
Yeah.
That's it. Like, there was no like, okay, if we look at current market growth, like we made analysis, we have these good channels. If I had all that, then it would make sense, like, because you have ammunition, to bring to the match. And he was not giving me any of that. He was just giving me motivation.
Okay.
And I felt that. I was like, there's no strategy. Like, we're just... And that troubled me. I was like, so essentially I'm just looking for a lucky break. And then I didn't want to... And then not only that, but the classes I was taking I wasn't really learning much. They were a bit interesting. Like, there was this course about logistics where it was cool to like kind of go in deeper into this part of the world that I didn't know. But a lot of them just felt the teachers were reading Wikipedia text about business, and it was kind of... And I remember one of them, holy shit, like he was working at Volvo, like selling trucks. And then he started giving World of Warcraft analogies, like, oh, it's like managing a raid. And I was like, oh no.
Wow.
no successful person ever. I'm sure there is, but anyway, I was just like in my head, I was like, what the? And then he's like, yeah, I saved all my money to do an MBA in the US, and I was like, but then now you're here. I don't know, whatever. I guess my point of all this is like it started to dawn on me that again, it always is the same, right? It's your ideas and realities come at odds.
Yeah.
I think that's really what it is. And here was my idea of like, yeah, making business in China, getting rich, versus the reality of like, I'm looking for luck. I'm not learning anything. And yeah, I mean, this is not what I wanted.
Do you think it could have gone differently, right? You're saying there was nothing to learn.
So if I had met, I'm not sure, what's the word? Not a guru, like a mentor.
Yeah.
If my father was sitting down with me and like, this is a strategy, this is a business model, like more concrete things, maybe I flew there, and if there was something more concrete to go on, I would have been happy, and maybe it would have been a good path for me, because I think I really like talking with people and making things happen. But I'm not smart enough. I think maybe some people, you just put them there and you're like self-fishes and they will make an empire happen. But I think those people are like 1 in a million. Like.
Yeah, for sure.
And so if you put me there and you just tell me self-fishes and meet people and just like watching animes or like I was watching again and just like meeting people, drinking, having fun. But I was like, I mean, I did try, like I did talk with some people, but I obviously wasn't getting very far. And yeah, so I was like, no, this is not for me. And actually around this time, so between while I was in Japan and China, I did have some like economics courses. And I think it's around throughout this when I started to realize maybe science or like math is something I wanted to do, because I really like the reasoning of like, oh, yeah, like with a parabola you can plot, I don't know, the productivity of a firm.
Yeah.
Before I was always like, it's just like when we were, for example, with Ana de la Fuente, so this was our math teacher, like she was great, but maybe she was explaining how it was useful, but it was never clear to me. Like it always seemed like you're just solving it for the sake of the problems and the promise that it will be useful. But
yeah, I think this is very common to all education, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to teach well, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think to become a teacher, I don't think you receive or at least I don't think it's so obvious to teach someone how to teach.
Yeah, no, and so to be clear, like she was an excellent teacher, and I think it's more like the problem of education that one thing is to teach, the other thing is to give you like a raison d'être, like why do you want to do math?
Yeah.
It was never clear to me. The only reason you would want to is because like you're good at it. Like, and I remember like for that reason I did like it, but since I wasn't studying, like again, it wasn't enough to like you could barely pass, but nothing beyond that. And then while I'm doing all these courses, I was having like a bit of a insight into like, oh, math in the real world, and I was like, that's cool. And then I started watching the Khan Academy, and I completely fell in love because he explains very well. And I think this was the first time in my life that someone was extremely well educated or motivated and had a reason to study it. And
so you just started watching Khan Academy because you liked it? Or
yeah, and then...
So you didn't need it for any course or anything? It was just...
It was
so
just,
good that you...
Yeah, no, okay, no, there was a reason, and that was... I started to realize this is not going to work, I need a plan B.
Okay.
And my plan B was like economics. But then I realized I needed more math because what I had done was much more business centered.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, I should learn math because I didn't really know. Like, I actually remember sitting down with, so I had 2 American flatmates, Zach and David, and they were also in the same university, but they were taking the more advanced math course. And you hear this, and then in this course, the homework was asking, name 5 polynomials. And I remember looking at him, I was like, oh, I don't know what a polynomial is. And now I look back and it's like, what the fuck? You're like at the university and you're asking, Jesus Christ. Like, anyway, just. And so, of course, if you have not, I mean, it's also not crazy. Like, as someone who had never really done any math, like, polynomial is just a term.
Yeah.
But if you do any basic sort of math, you'll realize it's just like a basic part of the language or like.
Yeah.
It's not a question. It's like,
It's like name 5 words.
Yeah, name 5 words, right? Yeah, like, and so it's not stupid not to know it. Like if you haven't studied a lot of Latin, then of course you would know them. So again, it's not a question of intelligence. But Yeah, so looking back, it was like, oh my god, I didn't even know that. And then I remember doing the Khan Academy, and then I was just asking for their math textbook and just doing all the exercises. And it was kind of like doing Sudokus, right? It was just fun, like problem solving. And I think what I liked the most was like these kind of trigonometric identities that you can see geometrically. I forget now what they were.
That is so funny. I hate the trigonometry.
Okay. No, I mean, so I have a love and hate relationship with trigonometry.
I mean, you've got much further into trigonometry than I have. For me, it was cool, and already at school I hated it. But
actually, I think it's interesting because it gets very beautiful when you get very far once you get with these Fourier. Because at some point you learn that so you have a function, right, like a polynomial. So for example, x squared, like it's this classic parabola everybody knows, and then you can have maybe a more complicated sum of these polynomials, with which maybe you can model the trend of the market. So really, as a function of time, what's the current price? Or even, I guess, us talking right now, you could plot with find a polynomial and fit it. And by fitting, it means finding the parameters such that coincide. And the cool thing about trigonometry is that you can, and I think maybe this is my favorite thing in all of math, is this Fourier transforms.
Mm-hmm.
So this theorem or principle that you're able to take our conversation, this function, and express it as this sum of sines and cosines. It's like so basically every function is infinite sum of waves, which is so like holy shit. But anyway, so it's really funny to go like from that moment of like having a somewhat good understanding of that to like what is a polynomial, like it doesn't compute it. But yeah, so really that started everything, and I would go deeper and deeper into the Khan Academy. And then after, so this was all happening simultaneously. And and so every 3 weeks I would have basically a fight with my father. Would call on the phone. I don't even remember what the details were, but it was basically me being like, no, but like what are we doing concretely? And for some reason it would turn emotional, and I'd be like, dude, I'm not sure. And he's like, no, but I'm your father, you must. Because I think it's also important to put the context of like, he was raised within this kind of like really old traditional Asian mindset of like the father is the emperor, like you must respect him no matter what.
And the son takes over the business of the father, not very often. Or
so they did, but it was always clear I wouldn't, which I'm very happy. Like they were just like that idiot. It doesn't even matter, but I mean that was actually never part of the conversation. It was more this idea of respect.
Okay.
Which I think is important, right? But I still was used to like with my mother kind of like this rebellious, like being able to talk and it's fine. But anyway, the point is we would fight a lot as a consequence, and eventually I just had enough. I was like, fuck this noise. I mean, I didn't say that, but I was like, we would always hang out, both of us sad. And so at some point I just quit. I was like, rage quit. And then my plan was, I went back to Switzerland. At the time my mother was in Lausanne. And then my plan was like, okay, I registered again for Japan. I was like, I'll just go back and finish.
Mm-hmm.
And then do economics. And so I guess we got, so in China, that was the big moment of like, this is something I don't like career-wise. Like I want to build knowledge. I want to be conscious, deliberate about my own personal development in terms of, skills and tools I have.
In a meta way or just career-wise?
It was not meta. It was really like learning. It wasn't too cool, but learning math, becoming So I remember I was talking with one of my uncles, and then he told me like, you shouldn't think about what career you want, but like what tools you want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I did like that framing of it, like what tools. So I was kind of thinking, if I'm an economist, like statistics or like really concrete tools, like purely in that sense. Like what can I study to learn tools to then do something else after? And yeah, I guess in a long story short, my mother was in Lausanne. And then she was like, oh, and I was doing Khan Academy the whole time there, and she even hired a tutor, and I was working with him, and I was like, oh, this is so fun. Like for like no reason. It's so weird. And then like I was so enthusiastic about it. And my mother was like, oh, look, there's a engineering school here. I was like, oh, cool, let me look at the curriculum. And I remember looking at the math department, like at the courses, and I was like, dude, this is all so cool. Like it was the first time I was like doing something because seems fun, and then that's it. It's crazy because I think I read it and then very quickly it was kind of like love at first sight. I was like, I'm gonna do this no matter what. And I think I was lucky in the sense that I was given all the resources to do it, that I was able to also do it, because it's true that it's not easy. Like,
you basically stumbled onto one of the best universities for
yeah,
engineering in Europe.
No, but getting there was supremely hard. I think I think it's the coolest thing and the thing I'm most proud of that I ever did by Emergent. Like,
so what was that process?
Basically, because again, my diploma was so bad, I couldn't, of course. Like, even if I did the good diploma, you need like very good grades. So forget it. Like, I didn't even have the good diploma.
This was even for the bachelor, or
for the bachelor.
For the bachelor.
Yeah, I was gonna start from zero for sure. And then they have this entrance exam, and the cool thing about it is, if you pass it, like you can take it even if you don't have any degree at all.
Yeah.
And if you pass it, you go in.
Wow.
But so of course it's a very hard exam. And so it was so there was 2 math exams, physics, chemistry, and biology, all in French. But again, it's fine. But I'm not
biology as well.
Biology as well, all of them. And I had usually you have like a year, but because I realized later, I only had like 4 months.
Okay.
So we went to like this private school, and usually it started a bit. So I was already coming like 1 month late.
Yeah.
So I would have had a year, so maybe 6 months alone and then do that. But they only had 4 months. And yeah, but it's crazy because I was like, I hesitated slightly. But I remember we were in Les Ans, so I forget why. Just like visiting maybe the school. And I was just standing there. And I had this like massive determination. Like, I was like, this is what I want to do and it's going to happen. Like, no doubt, no. I had very few moments in life that I had that kind of supreme confidence. And I was, I think, very jealous of my past self for a long time.
Yeah.
I think slowly I'm starting to understand where it was coming from. But I was just like, I don't know, like this raw American confidence. I don't know. It was just... And then, yeah, I go, and for 4 months, it was crazy because... and there was also programming. And it was not only programming, it was also like Boolean algebra, floating point arithmetic. Like, it's a lot in 4 months. And like, the math, it was like linear algebra, which is usually like university level.
Yeah.
It was also like analysis, like it was calculus in multiple dimensions and all that. And I had never like seen a limit. Like, it was really, holy shit. Like, I was for 4 or 5 months, no, it was 4 months. I would wake up, go to this private school, be super like hyper focused, walk back usually or with the bus, and then eat, study. At 9 p.m. I would meditate for fucking 5 minutes, sleep a bit, continue working until 11, sleep, and then repeat every single day.
Wow.
I never, like, it was ridiculous. Like, I look back and it's like, what the fuck?
So that's interesting because I can understand if you were passionate about maths, that studying math for that would be easy or relatively easy. But where did you get the energy to also study chemistry and biology, which maybe they were not so interesting to you?
I was like a man on a mission. Like, it's just like, I was working like my life depended on it. I don't know. And I wasn't like worried, stressed. It was just like, this is... And for a very long time, I was looking at it so jealous. Because once I passed and I was at EPFL, I mean, I did study and I think quite a lot, but never... I think if I continued to that extent, like surely I would have gone very far in math, like whatever it is. But I didn't, like... It kind of disappeared. It was like a flame was lit inside me. Like, I had never seen.
Do you think it would have been sustainable though? Because did you have time to see other people, like have fun or?
No, so I was lucky because there were some nice people in the school. So in the break we would talk, and after school, in the beginnings, one of them was helping me. Like, I guess for you with Alex.
Yeah.
Like, there was this guy. He was very knowledgeable. Mahmoud, a Lebanese guy, very nice guy, and then he was helping me so much. But I was like sitting in the classroom just hungry for knowledge. If I didn't understand, I was like, I don't understand, please explain again. And then he would explain and I was like, okay, I get it now. That's actually easy. And then another guy was like, what do you mean it's not easy? I was like, but I don't know, I was just just raw. I want to understand. I want to. I don't know. It was so much fun. I'd like. There was no. One thing I understood now. I think we have like two parts. There's like our essence and our psychological self.
Mm-hmm.
And this at the time I didn't know. And I think the psychological self is sort of like this. A lot of this world we build on like who we think we are. You know, I'm this type of person. I'm a shy person. Fear lives sort of there, like, and the essence is just it is like,
okay.
You know, like when if you're playing your favorite sport and you're living in the moment, that's the essence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the longest period of time I was just the essence. Like I was constantly. I don't know what happened. Like it's so lucky because it wasn't deliberate. I wasn't there like focusing. Like it happened, and then it, as randomly as it came, it also left.
It's just amazing. It's like you got divine inspiration.
No, seriously, I was like a fucking soul. Like it was so cool. I can't believe I did that. And while I was studying, it got me so far because I understood. I learned so much through that time, and of course I kept studying after, but again not at the same level. And it was sort of like a going down. I was always cool. I always learned things, but I guess it's true what you said. It wasn't sustainable. Like. Because you know what was missing is the mission was gone. Like once I passed, I succeeded.
Yeah.
And after that, it wasn't so hard to, like it was still hard, you know, like I had to study, but I was never like I think once you understand the game and you're not slacking, you don't have to study like crazy. Like you can still have a life. And so I was sort of doing that. I was still studying for sure, much more than necessary perhaps, but there was no more mission. I think that was.
This is actually a topic that I discussed recently with my girlfriend's dad.
Yeah.
We were talking about these books about expeditions to the North Pole,
mm-hmm.
and then how like everything goes bad, and then they have to survive for months on the ice, and then they have to sacrifice slowly all of their animals, and people start dying, freezing there. So, and we're thinking, or at least I was never able to finish those books because I felt they don't really teach you about leadership, because leadership in those cases is absolute in the sense, there's only one mission. It's survival at all costs, right? There's no, maybe today I don't want to survive, right? So maybe for you it was that feeling of there's no other option.
Yeah.
Either it happens or it happens, right?
Yeah. The moment, it's crazy. I remember the moment I decided, I went into that mind state mentally. No day did I hesitate. Like in the middle of the whole thing, they did like a mock exam.
Yeah.
And I failed it so hard. I didn't blink. I was because you know what? I was like, if I fail, I will try again next year. Like it was really like it doesn't matter what happens. I will get in there.
Yeah.
And like I believed it so hard. Like I think it's exactly as you said. There's no question. There was no. I don't know. It was so crazy. And then I think it's funny because I was like for 6 years maybe at EPFL.
Yeah.
Always jealous of that past self, always like reminiscing. Like, it was still fun, but it was never this epic like battle for
survival, basically.
Yeah. But it was also not desperate. It was like fun. It was just like.
Were you able to learn anything of the experience? Right. I mean, you were not able to replicate it, but did you get something out of it, or?
It was so much fun. No, I don't know. I didn't. It's a good question, actually. No, because I think in terms of learning, it's always, maybe it goes back to what I said in the very beginning, right? Like, I wonder when we actually learn when it's just a good experience. And that was just like a supreme experience, like in terms of happiness, joy. Like, I was completely unfazed. I remember it should have been hard. Like, my mother was in this relationship with this doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he was an okay dude, but also a bit of a difficult person, very quiet, and it wasn't going well. And I remember she would come to me and she would be very sad. She's like, "Oh, I think we should leave. Like, I'm not happy here." And I remember like trying to comfort her, like, it's okay. But I think in another time, maybe other place, like, I would have gotten sad because I feel sad for her, and I'm like, oh no. And it's not like I didn't care, but when I was with her, I cared as much as I could. But then I go back, I'm on my mission, because what there was nothing else I could do. Like, I mean, it's her relationship with him. Like, I told her, look, if I can stay with Mahmoud, his friend. Like, don't worry, just do what's best for you. Like, you don't have to. So I think I was in such a strong mental place. Like, it was even like external things wouldn't affect me. Like, not caring, but really just, it's fine. It can be there, but so I don't remember learning anything. It was just like super fun experience. Like, the learning always came when reality like smacked me hard down to the ground.
At least you have that feeling or that sense that if things go really bad, you probably go back to that.
What do you mean?
Like, if you ever really need it, probably that nacho appears again, right?
No.
Out of necessity or?
So, no. I mean, I never had it. I think now I'm at a similar stage actually with this startup.
Okay.
It's just pure essence.
Yeah.
Where I try to. I think it's the first time since then that I feel like it's not as intense because that was that was hardcore. Like, now I think maybe it ties back to the sustainability. Yeah. I think there's two parts for it. Like, first you need a mission, that was gone. I think the other one, of course, is friends or relationship, family. At the time, I didn't really have friends in Lausanne because I just came from China.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any relationship. And yeah, I was living with my family, so it was sort of okay. So it was very easy in that sense, right? Whereas now, like, as friends, people like you, where I really want to, like, not just let it disappear. It's nice to see each other again. Okay. I don't have any relationship anymore, but if there was one, I would, of course, like, want to make sure it's well taken care of. I try to talk with my family. I try to just to read funny things, listen to funny things, because I know it brings me joy. But at the same time, when I'm working, I just try to put my spirit in it. So I think you're right. Like, compared to that, I'm trying to find a more balanced version, because I cannot do that for like 10 years. But yeah, so I'm not. Maybe I did learn that from there, but it was not the moment where I was like, wow. It was just I was allowed to be myself in a pure way and just have fun at it. But the learning always came from suffering, for better or worse.
So what was the next step then? When was the next time you suffered enough to learn?
Oh, so there I learned about career, right?
Yeah.
I did suffer a lot, but I don't know for what reason. I did tell you the story. I think we can leave that for another time.
Okay.
Because it was not a big moment. But yeah, maybe it's to not leave that hanging. Basically, 4 years after that, my lungs collapsed multiple times, and it was fucking brutal as hell. And I'm not sure what I learned, so I'll be happy to discuss. Maybe we can figure that out some other time. But I think in terms of learning, the next big thing would be like relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And it came surprisingly late. And it took me many... So I think it's interesting because if I think about career, there was one big moment, which was really China. It completely shattered all my dreams. Like, at the time, in few words, it was simply trade fishes, get rich, and help people. Like, it was such a simple idea. Then it became more nuanced once that shattered.
Maybe just a question, because you said it twice.
Oh, yeah.
What is the part about helping people?
I think I don't know where it comes from, but I don't know if it's Benjamin Franklin, because he was also like part of his ideals or things he was doing was helping society. I don't know if it's this or animes that instills such a strong desire in me to help people. I don't know where it's from, but it's... And so I was kind of thinking like, I will acquire wealth to be able to do that. But to be honest, after... It's not that I let that go, but it's more like tools were more important for me. In the sense that I feel like perhaps... And to be honest, it's not like I'm I'm a saint and I was like, oh yeah, I want to help people. It's obviously not true because I wasn't thinking, oh, I will learn math because then I can further society. It was just like, I fucking love this. Like purely selfish. And even now it's like, oh, I want to do this because it's fun. But I think deep down for sure, I like this idea of like giving back, helping. I forget where I read it, but I think it's from the Avatar, the comic, not the blue people. I fucking love calling them blue people. But anyway, you know, if they were like real, it would be like politically incorrect to say the blue people. For sure. But because it's a fucking movie, it's okay. I don't know. I never realized it, but it's pretty funny. But yeah, in the comic, my favorite character is the Uncle Iroh. So if you've seen it, then it's probably your favorite character. He says, oh shit, now I forget what it was, but I will modify it a bit. But the gist of it was like, sometimes the best way to help yourself is helping others. And yeah, that idea really stuck with me. Of like, I don't know, a lot of times if I meet people and listening and trying to be useful, you always feel better. So I imagine if you can do it at scale, you will feel so good. No, I'm joking. But yeah, it's a good question. I don't know where. I think when I was younger and idealistic, it had a bigger place in my mind. Okay. Whereas now I'm also realizing it's not such an easy thing.
Yeah, definitely not.
Definitely not, right? But yeah, so I think the next thing which came is relationships. But I think the interesting thing is that was gradual. I think I had 2 big relationships. Like within each I learned a lot, but like I think together it's sort of what made me move from a point where I was like not very thoughtful about who my partner was, how I was behaving, to like being very critical in terms of what it is I want. And I think it goes back to what we were discussing very early on about juggling between imposing your own happiness and being open to growth and balancing those. I think I did them both very poorly. And also I was not honest with what I wanted. And I think through those 2 relationships, I kind of, now I feel like I have a better way to balance them. And if a relationship, like I'm much better equipped. It might not work, right? But still I feel like now I'm more deliberate. And actually it's interesting, right? I think it's not enough to be aware, right? You have to both be aware of it, but you need a good framework. You need to understand, okay, I have agency, but then you also need to understand what is it you actually want, and B, what's a good way to go about it. And I think that's maybe a very important nuance that and it actually then makes much more sense that I was not able to do these things. Again, I'm not trying to justify it, but because right, I'm like 18, I'm like, okay, I realize that I have agency, but then not only do you miss the fact that for certain things you're not thinking things through, like relationship, you also don't have the wisdom of like what it is you actually want. So you're not even honest. Like, I think I can say that honestly, that I was not very honest with what I actually wanted, but I also didn't know how to go about
finding out.
Yeah, finding out and building it with another person.
Yeah.
So I think it's cool now going back. It makes a lot of sense. Like there's a lot of nuance, it's very complicated, right?
Yeah. I think also the part that's complicated about relationships is that they never start as an equation. They never start as a. You never see a person and okay, rationally I want to be with that person, right? You just fall in love, and then once you've fallen in love, then you have to make it work, right? So it adds a layer of complexity that you didn't choose that person since the beginning rationally, right? It just happened.
And actually, it's true. Like before you said, like when you met Alicia, very quickly you hit it off.
Yeah.
And I think talking with friends and also through reading, maybe all great relationships started that way, which means they started hard.
Yeah.
Because it means it started with a bang, with a flash. So it's hard to
move to the more rational component. It's hard. What's can you apply anything that you've learned during the relationships to your current partnership with Brian for the startup?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I really liked about becoming more aware of relationships is that at the end, if you factor out, I guess, sexual component and the fact that you plan a lot ahead with family, it's very similar to many other interpersonal relationships.
Mm-hmm.
They're just two people with their own wants and needs, and just the context switches. And yeah, I think we had, so before I joined, so I guess Brian is the founder of the startup that I joined a month ago. And so we signed our, what's this called? The founders agreement. So essentially, since it's an early startup, we split the equity. And so we spent many hours discussing like what is a fair percentage, because obviously he already contributes in the beginning, and then how do you factor that in? And it's complicated because, like, especially if you look at the US, a lot of startups will just go 50-50 even though you started on your own or you had the idea. And I think the overarching philosophy is that most of the trip still remains.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, again, a generality. It's important to look at the specifics. And there was the nuance of the fact that, okay, he has a working prototype. He was finishing a more mature version. There's a bunch of users. There's money from EPFL in terms of like advice. So there was like something tangible.
Yeah.
And so suddenly you have to take these things into account. And I really I felt that with what I had learned from, like, I guess, these relationships, is that when we're discussing, I think I was taking the time for just him to talk and understand, whereas I think before I would already, I think still now it's a problem, like someone is talking, you're already thinking about the answers, trying to be better with that. But then I think maybe the key or the biggest change was like, if something he said didn't stick well, before I might have like switched or, like avoid not feeling nice, I would kind of sit down and try to query my emotions and be like, what does this feeling mean? I don't understand. And then I would actually tell him, look, I don't feel so good. Let's figure out why. And then we'll discuss. And I forget exactly now how that came up, but...
So it was, how did you apply what you learned in your previous relationships to now working in a startup closely with another person, right?
Yeah. Oh, no, so I meant, like, I don't remember the concrete part of the discussion when it happened. But so I think really listening to how I felt, and it was cool, like, to have really an open discussion. And I think in general now I really try to just be more open to how I feel. I feel that's a lot of times, and I think so many things tie in together, so it'll be fun to explore the different. But I think what I'm fear is that, we'll try to discuss different parts of it, but I'm starting to feel, because a lot of things are interconnected, and you start, like, at different points of your journey of understanding how you work, you have a different language or way to describe it. But then slowly it's kind of like, it's a simple way to describe it, and then you will, if we talk about different parts of it, you go back to. So, like, for example, what are different parts we wanted to describe? Like, what are, like, for example, with relationships?
Yeah.
We could have a whole discussion about that. Like, for example, I think for me it goes back at the end to this idea of, like, you have your essence, you have your psychological self.
Yeah.
And then how do you frame that towards relationship?
Okay.
And then if we talk about, how are you more productive? Of course, there's two parts. One is productivity tools, and the other one is literally just, like, motivation.
Yeah.
For me, it will also go back to that. Because now it's just kind of like, this is how I feel, how I work.
So maybe it's worth spending some time exploring what are our current frameworks to understand all of these issues, right? Because we tend to go back to our own frameworks and explain it in our own words within that framework. So maybe it's worth spending some time on that.
Okay. Oh wow, it's really
I think it's more than an hour, right? Yeah. So I really like what you said. Do you actually have to go?
No, it's fine.
I really liked this idea of going from, like trusting your feeling, but having to explore it, right? So, or at least for me, and what I recognize this is because sometimes I get a feeling, and then only through exploration can you either realize the feeling is wrong, and then you correct the feeling, which is not easy to do, but it's something you should be able to do. Or
what do you mean correct the feeling?
So let's say
what is feeling? Emotion is to be clear about what the
so let's say I mean, I go back to the dishes because I'm seeing them, right? But I think it was yesterday where Alicia said, David, again, the dishes are out, or something like that, right? Which, as soon as you hear it, it goes into, oh my God, she's complaining about something. Why is she complaining? All these thoughts. And then I say, hey, just don't tell me to do stuff like this. You know, I don't like. And then
you tell her this, or you feel it?
Yeah, no, I get this feeling, and I told her, right? And then she answers something, but we've gotten very good at deactivating those situations. So we both feel this feeling, right, of like rage. And then you feel it, and as soon as you feel it, you know you have to turn off
that's really cool.
the heater, right? Yeah. And on both sides, right? It's getting to where we both recognize those situations, and then I went to her. I said, hey, I got this feeling because of how you said it. And she said, okay, indeed, I said it badly, but it's still, you should have gotten that. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. I told you I would have gotten that by that time, or something like that. Where it's like, okay, my feeling of feeling enraged because she was asking me something was not entirely correct, because indeed I should have done that. But okay, I had some way of, some reason to feel that way because of the way she said it. In the end, it's just like, okay, this is the feeling I have. It's not correct because actually I should have done this, and so I cannot feel angry. In this case, there was an additional component, but it might be that I was responding negatively while when it was okay for her to ask me that.
But I guess the way I suspect if you felt something, it's because the way she said it, right?
Okay.
I wonder, because I feel like does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. So I don't think that's always the case. I think if you're doing something wrong and someone points it out, you might get a feeling of who the hell is this person?
Okay, so even if they say it kindly.
Even if they say it
kindly. But did she say it kindly?
I'm sure I could find occasions where she said it kindly, and I've had a negative feeling.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Okay.
Or I don't know, a feeling of I'm not being rewarded at work, right? Let's imagine someone gets, like, you're working in a team and someone gets the credit for something, and then you get this negative feeling, right? And then you go like, wait 1 second, I was this everyone should get a bit like rewarded, and then I was rewarded last week. It also works in this sense where we're part of a group, like, you know, like just diffuse the feeling where it's like, hey, there's no reason for feeling this. Sometimes there is a reason, and that's where you explore it with the other person, communicate, hey, I'm feeling this.
But why do you think it's fine to sometimes listen to it and sometimes not to listen?
No, you should always listen to it.
Okay, so why is it fine to say it's wrong? Because ultimately you're saying some emotions are right, some emotions are wrong.
Because nobody's perfect. So the reason why you got the feeling might be a good reason or might be a wrong reason. And so sometimes your feelings will make mistakes the same way you make mistakes.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
It's just about identifying those times where your feelings are mistaken.
That's true. Because I think it gets interesting when you're like really like, maybe there it's a bit easier because like I think it's interesting once you get lost in the emotion, right?
Yeah.
Once you feel very angry, very sad, it kind of feels like we become the emotion. I don't know if that makes sense.
100%.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
And because you're the emotion, it cannot be wrong because it's you. Right? I'm just like, I mean, of course you're able to dispel it, but like, it becomes harder to like if you're very angry. Yeah. At least for me, it's very hard to be like, oh, actually, I'm just.
I will give you examples of when I do this. So, I think one of the most important things I've learned, and we can dedicate a whole episode to this, is I can always be wrong.
Yeah.
There's been times where I was 100% sure that I was right, I was extremely mad or extremely convinced, and then I realized that I was wrong, or there was more to know about the topic. So now for me, it's a trigger that I have in my brain that whenever I'm feeling angry, doesn't matter if I know 100% that I'm right in feeling angry, I always acknowledge the possibility of me being wrong and that anger not being correct. So I'm able to have a trigger that as soon as I feel that, I'm able to diffuse myself.
Nice.
And then go have the conversation with the person. Because you never, even if when you're 100% sure, even if you were right in the end, there for sure you didn't have all the information.
Right.
And talking to the other person will get you more information that maybe allows you to explain better to the other person why you're actually right. There's no negative part to actually diffusing your emotion in that way.
Right.
But maybe we got a bit sidetracked, right? So
yeah, I don't even. We got very sidetracked. No, but it's fun. I think. I see.
So if we go back to, I think we were talking about relationships, right? What you had learned and how it's impacted your now some things. For example, you work in the startup. Should we pick up on where I left?
No, I mean, I think for me it's fine. We can finish it here.
Okay.
So I don't know if we can cut it after anyway. ¿Quieres hacer un outro o terminamos así? Podemos mergear después.
Yeah, we can finish.
Yeah, I think it would be nice.
So I think this is going to be the end of the first episode, right?
Yeah.
We cut it in half and we continue next time.
Yeah, that was super fun.
That was extremely fun indeed. So
no, it was. I think what I like about this also is to hear more of your story, like kind of what happened when I left.
Yeah.
I would love even to go more in depth, but it's just so cool to hear all the different parts and.
What I'm really, really liking, and it actually came up as one of the topics in the conversation, is I've never felt so free to let the other person talk, right? Like I'm thinking, holy shit, if all of my conversations could be this way, where the feeling of, okay, this is what I want to say next. Like if I had an idea, I just note it down and I continue listening to you. And if there's like a gap, then I just go back to my notes or whatever. But I felt like very comfortable just like, listening to you and
it's true. It's very hard. I think for me also I have bad memory, and then when I'm having a conversation, I will have like a question I really want to ask or a comment I want to make, and I think this is why I like talking slower also. Then it's easier to interrupt the other person, right? It's very hard. Like actually, at some point I wanted to ask you questions, and I was like, oh no. And then you just briefly stopped, and I was like, perfect. I was kind of like with the spear waiting there too. But. No, it was really cool. But I think in real life sometimes it can be hard because you want to ask something. But I think also we've already talked a lot. But yeah, I mean it flowed very.
Yeah, it was very, very good.
So we'll talk again at some point.
Indeed, we'll talk again.
Thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you very much.